Hello everyone, welcome to another interesting and informative session of the Analyst brought to you by Vajiram and Ravi. In today's video, we will discuss 9 important articles as featured in the Hindu and Indian Express for your larger understanding of the current affairs. The 5 main articles are as follows. In the first article, we will read about the need of essential program on immunization at global level. Then in the second article, we will inquire about the ongoing debate revolving around the redistribution of wealth in our country. Followed by the third article, where we will try to understand different provisions of Street Vendors Act 2014. Then in the fourth article, we will try to look into the status of global methane emission. And finally, in the fifth article, we will read about South Asian Seasonal Climate Outlook Forum, which has been in the news. Towards the end, there will be 4 news snippets especially curated to help you excel in the upcoming prelims examination, so stay tuned. The editorial highlights the significant progress made in the immunization globally due to the development of vaccines and also lists down the several persisting challenges. Thus, this issue of need of essential program on immunization globally forms an important component of your GS2 paper under the larger theme of health sector and the government policies and interventions. Well, vaccines are considered as early form of health prevention to prevent the disease from occurring, and as per an economic analysis, such vaccines are highly cost effective because every single rupee expenditure on any vaccination program, it actually provides with 7 to 11 times of return. However, an interesting fact here that by the year of 1974, there was available of vaccine to prevent only 6 diseases. So before we move further and try to inquire about the expanded program on immunization by World Health Organization, let's first have a brief overlook on the history of vaccine. The first vaccine was developed in the year of 1798 to cure smallpox by Edward Jenner. Then the vaccines were developed for anti-rabies, cholera and typhoid between the years of 1880 and 1890s. In the year of 1897, the first vaccine was developed to cure plague, especially prevailing in our country, by W. Hafkin. Now in this context, try to remember the Rand Commission as well as Chapekar brothers from your modern history. Then in 1950, the first polio vaccine was developed by the Polish virologist Hilary Kaprowski. And further, in 1951, there was a nationwide rollout of BCG vaccine to treat tuberculosis in our country. In the following years, there has been development of several vaccines to cure different diseases, such as for influenza in 1985, for hepatitis A in 1992, to treat HPV by 2006, Ebola vaccine was developed in 2019, and very recently to deal with COVID pandemic which was taking place, the COVID vaccine was developed in 2020. Thus, to further increase the immunization coverage globally, the World Health Organization launched an expanded program on immunization in the year of 1974. Under this EPI framework, various national governments, they launched their own national immunization program. So was followed by India, who launched its own EPI in 1978, and it was renamed to Universal Program on Immunization in the year of 1985. So let's try to evaluate this expanded program on immunization by World Health Organization, which according to the report has turned out to be a success story, where the coverage of children who are suffering with DPT or diphtheria, pertussis, tetanus, it has actually increased from a meager 5% in 1970 to 84% coverage by the year of 2022. Similarly, the smallpox was completely eradicated from the world in 1980, and there has been taken place a wide-scale polio elimination, with polio now prevailing only in two countries, which are our neighboring countries of Pakistan and Afghanistan. Also, the global effort which was taken against the COVID-19 also stand as a testimony to the global immunization effort. On following the similar lines, the immunization agenda of 2030 under the framework of World Health Organization aims for 50% reduction in the children which are receiving zero vaccines or any kind of vaccines which has been devised by WHO, and it aims to further develop vaccine against 125 pathogens. Also, the other targets are to achieve the 90% coverage for essential vaccines which are given to the children, as well as to introduce 500 new vaccines specifically in the low and middle income countries. In this context, we will also try to evaluate the effort taken by India to increase immunization in our country, where under Universal Immunization Program of 1985, the government currently provides free vaccines for up to 12 diseases such as diphtheria, influenza, hepatitis B, human papillomavirus, Japanese encephalitis, measles, pertussis, polio, rubella, tetanus, as well as tuberculosis. Further, the government launched the Mission Indradhanush of 2014 to further vaccinate the unvaccinated or partially vaccinated children, and under which till now this intensified Mission Indradhanush program has ensured the vaccination of 3.8 crore children and 96 lakh pregnant women across 701 districts. Also, full immunization coverage among children aged between 12 to 23 has actually increased up to 76%. Then, under its NTB initiative, the government provided for BCG vaccination drive. Recently, the government has provided for human papilloma virus vaccine for teenagers girls, especially to the tribal people, and the efforts which has been taken by the India was especially highlighted to deal during the COVID epidemic which was taking place, where the government took stringent effort first to vaccinate our population by developing an indigenous vaccine, as well as it provided the vaccine to low and middle income countries who were in the dire need of any kind of help under the Vaccine Matri program. The resultant of all these efforts can be seen that the coverage of DPT has actually rose to its all-time high in 2022 up to 93%. However, as highlighted by the report itself, there persist several challenges in this immunization program which act as an impediment to achieve the global immunization. As per the UNICEF's State of World Children Report of 2023, the childhood immunization coverage actually declined for the first time in the decade of 2021. Then, by the year of 2022, there were only 14.3 million children who did not receive any kind of vaccine doses, and 6.2 million children who were only partially immunized or given 1 or 2 doses of vaccines. And according to the report, such poor state of vaccination which is prevailing across the countries exists because of several factors. The first of which is the low financial status of the countries, where the development of any such vaccine actually requires a high initial capital cost. Then there is a long gestation period to develop such vaccine. Also, it requires coordination at several different level of agencies, and the country is required to have a resource fill with excellent people who are developing or researching for years. But various low and middle income countries are devoid of such financial infrastructure, which according to World Health Organization, currently there are more than 34 countries such as Nigeria, Ghana, then your small island states such as Papua New Guinea, where the vaccination drive is actually declining because of such poor financial infrastructure. Then this issue is further compounded because of the low private share, because as per the report, the private sector comprises of 2/3 of all the healthcare services which are being delivered. But when it comes to the vaccine delivery, the public sector actually amounts for 85 to 90% of the vaccine delivery. Then there is obviously the issue of poor health infrastructure. For example, if we look into a case study by National Health Authority in the villages of Madhya Pradesh, which was conducted in the year of 2020, where according to this study, there were more than 80% of the villages of Madhya Pradesh who were more than 5 kilometers far away from the nearest public health hospital. Also, when it comes to the people who are actually responsible for such large vaccination drives, such as the government teachers, the ASHA workers, the Anganwadi workers, all of these faces issues such as low capacity building. Also the issue of they are not well trained enough for such vaccination drives. Then they are facing the poor financial status of themselves. Thus they have to incur high amount of out of pocket expenditure to actually provide for the implementation of such vaccination drives taking place. Such poor financial status and health infrastructure is also driven by the low investment of the government in this public health sector, where the India's expenditure on health actually stood at 1.5%, and if we compare it from the other countries, it was abysmally low. Then there is issue of prevailing of vaccine hesitancy. Because of the less social awareness, people are generally reluctant to take any kind of vaccine, and such vaccine hesitancy was actually a lot of visible during the time of pandemic, where there were actually 17 crore of people at one point of time which were yet to take a single dose because they were hesitant to these vaccines. And it was also visible when the stones were hurled on ASHA workers who were actually going for vaccination drives. Further, there is a lack of data-driven policy making. As highlighted by the report, the India conducted its last field level evaluation of its universal immunization program back in the year of 1994, that is 2 decades back. So currently the universal immunization program which is being implemented, it is devoid of any kind of data driven policy. Thus the report suggests for several suggestive measures which shall be implemented to ensure universal immunization, where it put impetus on the vaccination for adults and elderly. Further, it says that the National Technical Advisory Group on Immunization shall create vaccine for all age group, and such vaccine shall be made free at the government facilities. Then such National Technical Advisory on Group on Immunization shall conduct research, and for this purpose it shall inculcate the medical colleges, the various private research facilities, the health hospitals at the higher level such as AIIMS, and then on the basis of such research, it shall provide recommendation for the use of vaccines by adults and elderly. Because currently there is a perception that any such vaccination shall be limited to the children only. To break such perception, such research and development of vaccine and its availability for free at the government facilities are required. Then the report highlights for social engineering, where it put impetus on the use of social media, where several health experts, medicine experts, they all shall try to inculcate a kind of a awareness program among the larger public to tackle the problem of vaccine hesitancy which prevails in our country. Further, it suggests to transform this expanded program on immunization by WHO into an essential program on immunization, so we can able to achieve the Sustainable Development Goal 3, which aims to provide health and well-being for all. With these suggestions, try to solve this practice question and comment your answers in the comment box. Be very careful of two things. First, be very precise with your word limit and set a timer of 6 to 7 minutes and try to answer this question in examination condition. We move forward to the next news. The Supreme Court has recently constituted a 9 judges bench to interpret the directive principle of state policy with respect to the ownership and control of material resources. This ongoing debate revolving around the redistribution of wealth forms an important component of your GS2 paper under the larger theme of government policies and interventions. So before we dwell deep into this debate and start taking a stand that where such redistribution of wealth shall be done or not, let's first try to understand the different constitutional provisions regarding the property rights and wealth distribution in our country. Keep this in mind that when originally the constitution was enacted, it provided for right to property as a fundamental right under Article 19 clause F of the constitution. Further, under Article 31, it provided that if a state is going to acquire the property, the person shall be adequately compensated. However, as we have already seen when we were discussing about the evolution of the basic structure doctrine, to implement the socialistic principles under Article 38 and Article 39, Article 38 which direct the state to minimize the inequality which exists, and Article 39 which provides the state for the equitable distribution of wealth and property. So these two articles, to implement them, the government at that time implemented the first Constitutional Amendment Act of 1951, which entered with two main articles, Article 31A and Article 31B in the Constitution. What they provided for? They provided that if there is any law which is being made for the acquisition of estate, it shall not be void on the ground that it violates any fundamental right, including this right to property. And if there is any such law which has been placed in the 9th schedule, it is completely immune from the judicial review on the ground that it is violating any fundamental right. Now, before we move forward, keep one very important fact in your mind, that such blanket ban on judicial scrutiny which was provided under the 9th schedule, this blanket was removed by the Supreme Court in IR Coelho case of 2007, under which the acts which has been kept even under the 9th schedule, they also fall under the provisions of judicial review. Then the government came up with Article 31C under the 25th Amendment of 1971, where it provided that the fundamental right, such as right to property, they are subservient to the directive principle of state policy, such as Article 38 and Article 39. And if the government is going to make any such law to implement the directive principle of state policy, then it shall not be void on the ground that it is violating any fundamental right. This provision of Article 31C was reviewed by Supreme Court in the Keshwanand Bharti case of 1973, where it actually upheld the validity of Article 31C. However, it put it under the subject to the judicial review. So to understand this, basically let's say that you own a property and that property is in a village which is hypothetically on the bank of Narmada river. Now tomorrow the government comes and say that I am going to make a dam here, and that dam is obviously going to implement the provisions of Article 39, where it will be act as a material resource and it will benefit the larger section of the society. So to create this dam, you need to give property to the government. And even if this is violating your fundamental right of that time, that is right to property, even then you cannot go to the court and challenge this decision of the government in the court, because under 25th Amendment, the primacy has been given to the directive principle of state policy. But in Keshwanand Bharti case, the Supreme Court said that no, the person can come to the court and challenge any such enactment of an act by the government. Thus, to further avoid such direct litigation in the court, the then Morarji Desai government enacted the 44th Constitutional Amendment Act of 1978. which basically made the right to property as a legal and constitutional right under Article 300A. So currently, the right to property, is it a legal right? Yes. Is it a constitutional right? Yes. Is it a fundamental right? No. Now, this tussle which was going, that whether the government should give primacy to the implementation of DPSP following the socialistic principle, or the fundamental right which has been guaranteed by the constitution, they shall be given primacy. This debate was settled in the Minerva Mill case of 1980, where the Supreme Court held that constitution exists on the harmonious balance between fundamental right and DPSP. Thus, the government can bring the acts to implement the directive principle of state policy, but at the same time they shall not be in the conflict with the fundamental rights given to the citizen. So currently the government can acquire your property, but under three conditions. The first is that such acquiring of the property shall be for any public purpose, such as building the dam. The second is that the government shall provide you with adequate compensation on the land rate of that time. And third, you can actually go to the court to challenge such enactment of the act under the judicial review power of the Supreme Court provided under Article 13 and 32 of the Constitution. Thus, following the socialistic principles, the government took several steps in the first 4 decades where it followed the socialist model of governance from the year of 1951 to 1991. Such as the redistribution of property by doing several kind of land reform, where the zamindari was abolished in 1951. There was provided with Tenancy Act to those farmers or to the landless laborers who did not had any land to cultivate, because all the land was usurped by the traditional zamindars. Then the government brought with the Land Ceiling Act, where it identified a family as a unit of 5 members, and any such family can own a maximum of 10 to 27 acre of irrigated land and 35 to 54 acre of any dry land. Further, to enhance the financial inclusion, the nationalization of bank was done. For example, 14 banks were nationalized in 1969 and 6 banks were nationalized in 1980. The nationalization of insurance sector took place much earlier in the year of 1956, because what used to happen that these banks, they were just giving loans to their corporate friends only, and the larger section of the society was completely excluded from such banking services. Thus, the government intervened in the banking sector for the purpose of financial inclusion. To further ensure the income inequality, high rate of direct taxes was introduced. For example, you guys can see here in the table that in the year of 1974 to 75, during the time of Indira Gandhi government, if you were earning, let's say, above 70,000, then you had to pay 70% of your income to the government, and even 10 years down the line this existed up to 50%. So this was the high rate of direct taxation. Then there was estate duty which was implied, and further there used to exist a inheritance tax on wealth, which has brought into the debate in very recently. So what was this inheritance tax on wealth? Let's say that if there is your father and he has bought 1 acre land just behind a national highway which has been passed recently. So the amount of that land has actually significantly increased, and now that father is giving this land under his will to you as your son. So you are going to become rich overnight. But the government is saying that because you have not contributed in any way in the accumulation of wealth by your father, and this wealth actually belongs to your father, then if you are inheriting such wealth, you need to pay a tax to the government. Thus, there was already existed a inheritance tax on wealth in earlier times. Further, to prevent the privatization of the larger sector, there existed a Monopolies and Restrictive Trade Practices Act of 1969, which ensured that one company does not exorbitantly grows and try to monopolize the market, as we are seeing with 2 or 3 companies in the recent times. But because of such socialist steps which has been taken, there were several issues which arose because of this. First was that it was obvious that such high intervention by the government actually stifled the growth which was taking place. which can be seen from the table that from the year of 1960 to 1980, there was a meager rise in the real GDP per capita. And such rise only shoots up after the LPG reforms of 1991. Further, let's say that if I know that if I am going to earn above 70,000 and the government is going to take 70% of that, which basically means that out of 30 days if I am working, on 20 days I am actually working for the government. So why I will actually let the government know that I am earning this much? So such high taxation actually led to high concealment of income and taxes, ultimately leading to tax evasion and the rising issue of black money. Further, the administrative cost to calculate and collect such estate duty and wealth tax was actually higher than the revenue which were being generated by them. Thus, following the LPG reforms or liberalization, privatization and globalization reform of 1991 under the Narasimha Rao government, the government moved towards a mixed economy after 1991, especially following the directives under the new industrial policy of 1991, where several such stringent acts such as MRTP Act was abolished and replaced with a much lighter Competition Act of 2002. Also, there has been huge reduction which has taken place in the direct taxes. For example, the corporate tax has actually slashed and it has come down to 22%. The MAT has been slashed. There is now no tax on buybacks as well as no enhanced surcharge. So the government has significantly increased the direct taxes, thus promoting the people to earn more and reveal their income as well. Also, further taking the steps, the estate duty was abolished in 1985 under the Rajiv Gandhi government and the wealth tax was abolished in 2016. However, why there is this debate again on increasing such taxes, putting inheritance taxes or for revival of such socialistic measure? The reason for that is that as per the World Inequality Lab report of 2022, there is rising rampant inequality in our country, where as you guys can see in the table, the top 1% of the people who had the highest income, 1% of the total population, their contribution into the national income was 6% in the year of 1982. However, 20 years down the line, it actually increased to 22%. Similarly, the top 10% of the people who have this share of national income, their share in national income increased from 30% to 55%. And the bottom 50 and the middle 40%, which also includes me, our share actually declined from being 46% in 1982 to 30% and 24% in 1982 to 15%. Thus, as highlighted by the report, the India's ultra-rich ground is keep on growing, where the Gini coefficient, which is basically a measure of the inequality, with the highest figure denoting the higher level of inequality, in major economies such as India, it is as high as 82.3. And the number of millionaires, while significantly growing, at the same time we can also see the number of multidimensionally poor people who are increasing, because as per the multidimensional poverty index of 2023, in India there currently still lives 23 crore multi-dimensionally poor people. Thus, India is moving towards plutocracy, where the richest 10% have the 77% of the national wealth, while the poorest 60% has only 4.7% wealth. Thus, there is this growing debate revolving around that there is imminent need for the redistribution of wealth. At the same time, there is an ongoing case in the Supreme Court where Supreme Court is examining the provisions of Article 39B, where the private properties which are held by these individuals, can that fall in the category of community resource as well. However, while we are putting impetus on such redistribution of wealth, we also need to recall that such high wealth taxes and high amount of government intervention also actually mired our growth. Thus, a balanced approach is required to ensure the principle of economic justice, which has been enshrined in the preamble of our constitution. With this suggestion, we move forward to the next news. The article highlights the challenges which are being faced by the Street Vendor Act as it completes a decade of its implementation and suggests for the reforms which shall be implemented. Thus, the provisions and challenges of Street Vendors Act of 2014 forms an important component of your GS2 paper under the larger theme of government policies and interventions. As defined by the Street Vendor Act of 2014, a street vendor is basically an entity that offers the daily use services either through a built up structure, which can be your sabji mandi, or through by moving from place to place, such as your sabji wala. Now, these street vendors also forms an integral part of our Indian culture, because you cannot imagine Mumbai without its vada pav, or you cannot imagine Chennai without its dosa stalls. Thus, to provide safeguard to these street vendors, the government has taken several steps. First of which in that direction was the enactment of the Street Vendors Act of 2014, which provided for some very important provisions, such as to protect the livelihood right, the social security of street vendors, and to regulate the urban street vending in the country. And for that purpose, it constituted a town vending authority in each local urban body. Further, to increase the participation of these street vendors in the decision making, it provided for two important provisions. First of which was that 40% of the member of such town vending authority shall be from the street vendors itself, and they shall be elected or selected through an election process. Further, it provided for a 33% of the sub-representation of women street vendors in this town vending authority. Also, it said that there shall be a survey of street vendors which shall be taken every 5 years, and thus this town vending authority will issue a certification to that street vendor. Now, if I am a street vendor and I have got such certification, then I cannot be evicted until such survey has been completed. And in a particular city or town, if there is a marketed zone, such population of these street vendors can be 2.5% of the population of that total ward or zone. Then the Act very clearly lays down the process for the relocation, eviction and the confiscation of goods from these street vendors. And it also creates that if such eviction or confiscation of goods or property is being done by the local authority, then there shall exist a grievance redressal committee which will be chaired by a civil judge or judicial magistrate. Also, when these street vendors were significantly impacted during the time of COVID, the government come with an innovative measure of Pradhan Mantri Swanidhi scheme, where it provided the credit facility or loan tenure on working capital to these street vendors, where they also got monthly cashback incentives. They had interest subsidy of 7%. So if they are going to do the timely repayment, then the government will provide the 7% per annum interest. Also, it covered urban local bodies across the country as well. However, as highlighted by the report, even though such imminent steps has been taken by the government, there still exist several persisting issues. First of which is obviously the administrative apathy which exists, where there is continuous cases of harassment and eviction of these street vendors, which even we have become now used to seeing this in the market or in the sabji mandi, because of the lack of awareness by these safeguards provided under the Street Vendors Act to these street vendors. And even the government officials at the local level, and also we can guess that the large amount of street vendors, even they don't know that they have been provided with such safeguards under a government mechanism. Then obviously there is a bureaucratic overreach, where there is this control of urban local bodies on this town vending authority which has been created under the Act. Further, the tokenization of women representation exists, where the woman has been just represented for a meager share. So first of all, their 33% quota is not implemented, and even if it is implemented, they do not have any authoritative voice in decision making when it comes to the town vending authority. Further, there is the prevalence of weak urban local governance mechanism, where there is no coherent integration between this town vending authority and the provisions which has been provided under the 74th Constitutional Amendment Act of 1992. Even under the smart cities mission, so let's say if I am creating a smart city here, it is obvious that when I will come to the planning level, these street vendors in the urban areas forms an important component of that. But under the provisions of Smart Cities Mission, these street vendors are completely excluded, thus making it non-exclusive. Further, even if urban local bodies, they want to create some plan for these street vendors or to create some digital infrastructure to enhance the income of these street vendors, they cannot do so, and that inability is translated because of the poor financial status of these urban local bodies. Where with the recent reports, we already know that these urban local bodies are 60 to 70% reliant on the transfers by the government. Further, the issue of marginalization and stigmatization which take place along these 10 million street vendors as per the National Association of Street Vendors of India, where whenever we have this imagination of a world-class city, let's say Rome in Italy or New York in USA, then it is obvious that this image of street vendors with their thelas, it does not suit well with that image. And that leads to their marginalization and stigmatization. Further, these street vendors, they are facing several issues such as climate change. So it is obvious that who is going to be the biggest victim of the extreme weather events which will take place or the heat waves which are taking place currently. These street vendors who are selling your vegetables, your fruits on those thelas outside. Then there is a crowding in effect, because as the unemployment is rising in our country, there is rising number of these thelawalas and street vendors in our country, where it is leading to the crowding in effect and thus high competition among them. And this competition has been further enhanced because from the e-commerce sectors, which are obviously they procure a large amount of goods, and because of that they provide high amount of discount, and then this service is being delivered at your doorstep. So why you will actually venture into the market, go to these street vendors, do that bargaining exercise? Because of these issues, as highlighted by the NASV, 30% of the vendors are in very young age group, and 12% are actually falls in the elderly bracket. 40% of these street vendors are illiterate, and 65% of these vendors does not have any kind of confectionery or kind of a processing system where they store their goods at home. 65% of vendors use their savings only towards their business activities to sustain themselves, and 70% of them actually spends between 8 to 12 hours on the street beside 2 hours of cleaning and display. Thus, to deal with all these challenges, the report highlights for certain suggestive measures. First of which is obviously that there shall be a bottom-up approach which shall be taken by the Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs, where there shall be a mechanism of decentralized planning, and we need to integrate these urban local bodies along with this town vending authority. And to create that, it is requirement of capacity building of these urban local bodies. Further, there is urgent need of amendments in the city planning guidelines and the urban schemes such as Smart Cities Mission, Amrut Mission, as well as we need to inculcate a provision of street vendors as a sub-component in the National Urban Livelihood Mission. Further, the report suggests that the credit support which has been provided under the PM Swanidhi, it shall be extended because it has been very beneficial to these street vendors, as well as the provisions of this Street Vending Act shall be strictly implemented. With these suggestions, we move forward to the next news. A modeling study has revealed various processes which are responsible for increasing methane emission, which is aiding the global warming which is taking place. Well, as per the IPCC report, the temperature has already risen 1.2 degrees Celsius above the pre-industrial level. Thus, this methane emission and the issues related to it forms an important component of your GS3 paper under the larger theme of environment pollution and degradation. Methane is basically a simple hydrocarbon consisting of one carbon atom and four hydrogen atoms, which makes it highly inflammable and thus widely used worldwide. The reason of concern with methane emission is because it is a powerful greenhouse gas. What is a greenhouse gas? Greenhouse gas is simply the gas which actually traps the extraterrestrial radiation which is going out from the earth and thus leads to the global warming. Now, this methane is the second most abundant anthropogenic greenhouse gas after CO2. But keep this in mind that this methane has more warming potential than the carbon dioxide. And as per the report, it has 28 times more potential when it comes to CO2, and it gets much more higher after the 2 decades of emission. Now, this methane emission is naturally forms the part of the carbon cycle, where over a period of time 9 to 12 years, this methane is actually converted into CO2 through the process of oxidation reaction. However, as per the report, this methane emission has significantly increased due to anthropogenic activities such as excessive agriculture, dairy farming, extraction of fossil fuels, etc. And because of which this methane emission forms part of 16% of the total greenhouse gas emission in the world. Now let's try to understand, as per the report, what are the sources of this methane emission. The first is the thermogenic methane, which is released because of the extraction of fossil fuels such as oils, and then there exists a methane hydrate, which is basically the sedimentary rocks which are below the permafrost region, or they can also be found in the continental shelves or in the lake beds around the continents. So there can be a thermogenic methane which is obviously being released, and then there is a biogenic methane. And this biogenic methane is released because of the microbial action such as of single cell microorganism which is called as archaea. Now remember that archaea is a prokaryote and it has a stark difference from the eukaryotic. What is the differences? We will have a brief overlook here, where there is this archaea which is a unicellular organism. They lack any kind of nucleus and they do not have any membrane found organelles. Thus, the nuclide of prokaryotic cell contains DNA that is actually small and circular, and some example of such prokaryotic cell include the bacteria and archaea. Now, there has been intensification of such single cell microorganism or archaea because of the anthropogenic activities which are taking place, where this archaea actually thrives in the oxygen deficient conditions such as prevalent in the digestive tract of animal, in wetlands, in rice paddies, landfills, or your sediments of lakes and ocean, as well as biomass burning, such as burning of forest, which has been recently taken place in Uttarakhand. So even that will lead to the high emission of methane. Thus, as per the report, the methane emission from oil and natural gas exploration has actually declined between 1990 and 2000, and it has, from then onwards, it has remained stable. So according to the report, this biogenic methane emission, which is being caused by the archaea, that is the primary cause. Now, to prevent such methane emission, the government of India has taken several steps. First of which is the Harit Dhara initiative. where it is basically an anti-methanogenic supplement feed which is provided to the cattle. And this has been discovered by Indian Council of Agriculture Research, where it aims to decrease methane emission from the cattle by 17 to 20%. Then the Confederation of Indian Industry as well as the Energy Research Institute, it has also launched an India greenhouse gas program, where they are trying to measure the greenhouse gas which is being released specifically from the methane sector and trying to curb down these emissions. Also, the government has recently adopted for the BS6 emission norms, which aims at 70% reduction of nitrous oxide. Also, under its Punch Amrit target which government has taken, it is aiming to majorly move towards 50% of renewable energy, thus to decline the use of fossil fuels and the extraction of fossil fuels. However, if such steps has been taken by the government, we need to keep in mind that the government of India has yet not joined the global methane pledge, which was adopted at COP26 at Glasgow, and it is a major initiative led by European Union and USA, which aims to reduce the methane emission by at least 30% below 2020 level by the year of 2030. Now, why it is such a major reason of concern for our country is because India is the third largest methane emitter after China and Russia. And keep this in mind that these three countries have not joined the global methane pledge. Thus, there are imminent steps which are required to further curb the methane emission to ensure the climate neutrality target which we have set ourselves to be achieved by the year of 2070. And thus, India shall reconsider its decision whether to join this global methane pledge or not. With these suggestions, we move forward to the next news. But before that, just try to solve this previous prelims year question and comment your answer in the comment box. The 28th meeting of South Asian Seasonal Climate Outlook Forum, which is currently underway in Pune, Maharashtra, has predicted that there will be above than normal rainfall along most of the South Asian countries during the upcoming monsoon season. This organization, SASCOF, and the predictions which it has made forms an important component of your prelims paper under the larger theme of geography. So let's first try to understand what is SASCOF and what are its forecasts. Well, SASCOF is basically the consortium of meteorologists and hydrological experts from 9 South Asian countries. Who are these 9 South Asian countries? The first is API, that is Afghanistan, Pakistan, India. Then there is NBS or Nepal, Bangladesh and Sri Lanka. And finally, there is BM Square or Bhutan, Maldives and Myanmar. All of this forms the 9 South Asian country for which SASCOF provides for regional forecast for both southwest monsoon as well as northeast monsoon. And in this, it is supported by the World Meteorological Organization, which is a United Nations specialized agency, and India is also one of its 193 members. And WMO has its headquarters in Geneva, Switzerland. And this SASCOF is being conducted since 2010. Where, according to its forecast, there will be above than normal temperature which will take place especially in the South Asian region, and currently it is prevailing because of El Nino and anticyclonic conditions. Over a period of time, this will actually pave way to above than normal rainfall in most of the South Asian countries. However, from the current heat waves and anticyclonic conditions, the regions which will be the worst affected from these heat waves, according to the SASCOF, will be the east of Pakistan, Rajasthan, Gujarat, north of Maharashtra, the coastal areas of Karnataka and Kerala, as well as the islands of Lakshadweep, then it will also significantly impact Nepal and Bhutan and further central and upper Myanmar. Now, what are the factors according to the SASCOF which will ultimately lead to such high or more than above normal rainfall? The first is that El Nino will actually weaken. What is El Nino? El Nino is basically, see, first we understand the normal condition. So in the normal condition, there are trade winds which blow in this particular direction. So they are called as easterlies. They reach to the South African continent. From there, there takes a reversal of these seasonal winds towards India. And that reversal winds takes place because ITCZ has come to the over our country, that is intertropical convergence zone, because by the time of June 22 the sun is directly over the Tropic of Cancer. In El Nino, what happens that there take place the warming of this central equatorial Pacific region. So now the wind which was moving from this high pressure to low pressure area being created over India, now the low pressure has shifted where? To the central equatorial Pacific. So now these trade winds will actually get weakened and it start blowing in this particular direction, thus ultimately leading to low rainfall in our country. The conditions of drought, the high amount of crop losses which will take place because of the less rainfall. But now in the second phase of monsoon, there will take place the weakening of El Nino, as well as there will be development of La Nina. So now what is La Nina? La Nina is where there take place a cool weather in this particular condition, which can also take place because of the upwelling of the water. And thus there will be intensification of low pressure towards the Indian subcontinent. Thus the wind which was blowing, it will further intensify and that will lead to high amount of rainfall over Indian subcontinent. As well as there is development of the positive Indian Ocean dipole. What is positive Indian Ocean dipole? Positive Indian Ocean dipole is where there is a warmer than normal temperature in the Arabian Sea in comparison to the Indo-Pacific Ocean of this region or the Bay of Bengal. So let's say the temperature of Arabian Sea is 27 degrees Celsius and in Bay of Bengal it is around 20 degrees Celsius. This will lead to the formation of a positive Indian Ocean dipole, which is obvious. So now the wind is going in this direction. It has reached to the South Africa, and now because of this very high temperature which prevails in Arabian Sea, it is obvious that there is intensification of low pressure in this area. So the seasonal reversal of wind will increase. So the monsoon will intensify and it will lead to above than normal rainfall. Now, such above than normal rainfall is actually very important for our country, because if we can look into this map, it tells us that large amount of areas are actually dependent upon the irrigation sector in our country. So there exists, let's say, 100% of irrigation system in Ladakh, but however when it comes to Madhya Pradesh, almost 48% of the agriculture depends upon monsoon. That is 80% in the case of Maharashtra, more than 60% in the state of Karnataka. Thus, such high dependence on monsoon means that if there will be above the normal rainfall, this region will be benefiting. But at the same time, it can also intensify into extreme weather events such as flash floods, cyclones, etc. So, the Indian authorities such as Indian Meteorological Department and the National Disaster Management Authority shall be on their toe and shall be evaluating the weather forecast in the coming months. On the basis of this information, try to solve this particular question and we move forward to the next news. In this particular segment, we are going to deal with some news which are very important for the upcoming prelims examination and will help you significantly to eliminate some important statements. The first of which talks about the International Workers' Day, which is celebrated today on 1st of May. So we will have a brief overlook on how this International Worker Day came into existence. Well, the story dates back to the Haymarket Affair of 1886, where the American Federation of Labor actually called for a general strike to take place on 1st of May 1886. But the authorities responded brutally, which ultimately led to the 4th May riot. thus ultimately keeping this date of 1st May in the conscience of the workers across the world, which was taken into cognizance by the Second International, which was established by the Marxist International Socialist Congress in Paris, and it acted as a successor to the International Working Men's Association, where it ultimately called for the 1st May to be celebrated as the International Workers' Day. And there was a great international demonstration which took place to support the 8-hour working day, which now has become a norm. Why this International Working Association is very important for us, or this Second International? Because it was here in the 1907 Stuttgart Congress which was taking place, where the Madam Bhikaji Kama actually raised the flag of Indian independence for the first time, which you guys can see on the screen. With this, we move forward to the next news, where we'll talk about what exactly is fundamental right to travel. Why it has been in the news? Because recently the Bombay High Court said that the public sector banks, let's say State Bank of India, it cannot request LOC or lookout circular against the loan defaulters by setting aside the central government office of memorandum. So basically, let's say that if I have defaulted with the State Bank of India and now I am about to leave the country, such as Vijay Mallya or Choksi, etc. But the government says that the public sector bank cannot release a lookout circular for them. Why? Because it is actually the violative of fundamental right to travel, which has been guaranteed under Article 14 and Article 21 according to the Bombay High Court. Now keep here this in mind that under Article 19, it provides for right to freedom of movement within the territory of the country. Then there was a landmark Maneka Gandhi versus Union of India case of 1978. Where the Supreme Court overruled its earlier judgment of Gopalan case of 1950, where it said that the protection under Article 21 or right to dignified life is only available against the arbitrary executive decision and not from the arbitrary legislative action. Right? So let's say if I am the district magistrate and I have taken any arbitrary executive action, Article 21 prevents you against it. But if the law has been actually changed, right, by the legislative action, and then it is violating the Article 21, then that cannot be challenged in the court. However, in this Maneka Gandhi versus Union of India case of 1971, Supreme Court took the larger interpretation where it introduced the doctrine of due process of law. And it said that law shall be reasonable, fair and just, and also provided for the right to travel abroad. With this, we move forward to the next news where we will talk about the index of core industries, where there are these 8 core industries which forms the 40.27% weight of items included in the index of industrial production. This index of industrial production is released monthly by whom? By the Central Statistical Organization, and the base year is constituted as 2011 to 12. Who are these major 8 core industries? The first with the largest share is your petroleum and refinery. The second largest share with 19% is your electricity generation. With 17% there is steel production, and now then it is followed by coal production, crude oil production, natural gas, cement and ultimately fertilizers. With this, we move forward to the last news, where we talk about the Regional Economic Outlook for Asia and Pacific report, which has been released by the International Monetary Fund or IMF, where according to the report, the public investment is actually remains the important driver for India's growth, where according to the IMF's growth forecast, India, which is the highest rate of growing when it comes to the major economy, it will grow up to 6.8% in the year of 2024 to 25. And for the region of Asia and Pacific, that growth rate will be around 4.5%. Now, according to IMF, such growth will be possible because of the reduction in the headline inflation which consists of food prices, oil prices, which change very frequently, right? So that is going to decline because of the lower energy prices. With this discussion, we have reached to the end of our session today. Do not forget to attempt the questions at the end of the video and test your knowledge. We will meet in a very interesting session very soon. Till then, all the very best for your preparation, guys, and thank you.